The message chimed with an almost surgical precision, cutting through the low hum of the office. A single line of text on my screen, stark and without preamble. Elias Thorne, come upstairs. My breath caught. Just that. No explanation, no please, no context. It was an order, delivered with the same cool efficiency he applied to multi-million-dollar acquisitions. And my mind, my traitorous, undisciplined mind, did what it always did when Elias Thorne summoned me. It spiraled. It concocted a fantasy so vivid and immediate it felt like a memory. In it, I did not knock. I walked straight into his corner office, the one with the panoramic view of the city that always seemed to mock my own cubicle's gray fabric wall. I would close the heavy oak door behind me, the click of the latch a final, definitive sound. He would be standing by the window, a silhouette against the afternoon glare, and he would turn slowly, his expression unreadable as always. He would not say a word. He would just watch me as I walked toward his desk, the vast expanse of polished mahogany that separated us every day. And then, in this fever dream, he would meet me there, his hands going not to my shoulders, not to my face, but straight to the buckle of my belt. The rasp of the zipper would be the only sound, and then his hands, those large, capable hands I'd seen sign deals and gesture with quiet authority, would grip my hips and push me down, right there, over the smooth, cool surface of his desk. I squeezed my eyes shut, the back of my neck prickling with heat. It was insane, a completely unhinged reaction to a simple, professional summons. I was Julian, a mid-level analyst who was good with numbers and better at being invisible. He was Elias Thorne, Chief Executive Officer, a man whose name was whispered with a mixture of reverence and fear in the hallways. We existed in different ecosystems that happened to share the same corporate letterhead. The space between us was not measured in feet or floors, but in power, in wealth, in a kind of gravitational pull he exerted that I could only orbit from a safe distance. You going up? Sarah from marketing asked, peering over our shared cubicle wall. Her face was a mask of casual curiosity, but I knew she was cataloging the data point. Julian, the quiet one, summoned to the penthouse floor. It was an anomaly. Looks like it. I managed, my voice sounding tight and unfamiliar. I stood up, smoothing down my trousers, a completely useless gesture. My heart was a frantic bird beating against my ribs. I felt like I had the fantasy tattooed on my forehead. I tugged at the collar of my shirt, which suddenly felt 2 sizes too small. The elevator ride was a form of torture. The mirrored wall showed me a man I barely recognized, pale, wide-eyed, his tie slightly askew. I looked like I was being led to an execution, not a meeting. What could he possibly want? My latest report on market projections? It was solid. I triple-checked the data. My quarterly performance review? Not for another 2 months. Maybe I was being fired. The thought sent a jolt of cold dread through me, momentarily eclipsing the heat of my earlier fantasy. Getting fired would be catastrophic. But getting fired by him, personally? The thought was strangely, terrifyingly intimate. The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor. It was a different world up here. Quiet. The air smelled different, cleaner, with a faint, expensive scent of leather and something else I couldn't place. Cedar, maybe. The carpet was so thick my footsteps made no sound. It was like walking on a cloud or into a predator's den. His assistant, a woman with a smile as sharp as her stilettos, nodded at me without looking up from her screen. He's waiting for you. I approached the oak door, the real one from my fantasy, and my palm was slick with sweat as I reached for the handle. I hesitated, then gave a soft, hesitant knock. Come in, a low voice commanded from within. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The office was exactly as I had imagined it, only bigger. The view was breathtaking, the city sprawling out below like a circuit board. And he was there, not silhouetted by the window, but sitting behind his desk, his jacket off, sleeves of his crisp white shirt rolled up to his elbows. He was looking down at a tablet, one finger tracing something on the screen. The late afternoon sun caught the silver in his dark hair, turning it to spun mercury. He did not look up for a full 10 seconds, and I stood there, just inside the doorway, feeling like an awkward teenager. The silence stretched, filled only by the whisper of the ventilation system. I cataloged the details I could only guess at from a distance. The strong line of his jaw, darkened with a 5 o'clock shadow. The way his forearms were corded with muscle, a testament to time spent somewhere other than behind a desk. The intense focus in his brow, which was perpetually furrowed in a state of deep concentration. Finally, he looked up. His eyes, a shade of gray that seemed to absorb all the light in the room, met mine. There was no warmth in them, but no anger either. They were just assessing. It was the same look he gave a balance sheet, and it made my skin crawl with 1,000 conflicting sensations. Julian, close the door. My heart hammered against my sternum. I reached back, my hand fumbling for the handle, and pushed the heavy door shut. The click of the latch was loud, definitive, just like the fantasy. A wave of dizziness washed over me. I gripped the edge of my own wrist to steady myself. This is it. I'm being fired. He's going to do it himself to make an example of me. He gestured to one of the 2 leather chairs in front of his desk. Sit. I sat. The chair sighed under my weight, a sound of expensive complaint. I perched on the edge, my back ramrod straight, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. Elias leaned back in his own chair, the movement fluid and controlled. He set the tablet aside and steepled his fingers, resting his chin on them. His gaze was still locked on me, and I felt like a specimen under a microscope. I could feel him seeing everything. My cheap suit, my nervous posture, the pulse fluttering at the base of my throat. I've been reviewing your file, he said, his voice a low baritone that seemed to vibrate in the air between us. My stomach plummeted. My file. That was corporate speak for, we've been building a case to get rid of you. And your recent analysis of the Nordic expansion project, he continued, his eyes not leaving my face. It was thorough. Was that a compliment? From him, the word thorough could be a synonym for pedantic or slow. I decided to remain silent, figuring it was the safest course of action. Saying nothing was better than saying the wrong thing. You identified 3 key risk factors that the executive team completely overlooked, he stated, a matter of fact. He picked up a pen from his desk, a heavy, silver fountain pen, and began turning it over and over in his fingers. The motion was hypnotic, deliberate. Specifically, the currency fluctuation models. They were elegant. Elegant. My models were elegant. A strange, unfamiliar warmth bloomed in my chest. It was praise. Actual, specific praise from Elias Thorne. I had spent 6 years at this company, and the most I had ever gotten from him was a curt nod in the hallway. Thank you, Mr. Thorne, I said, my voice a little hoarse. Which is why I have a proposition for you, he said, setting the pen down with a soft click. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the gleaming desk. The space between us seemed to shrink. I could smell his cologne now, a subtle, clean scent of bergamot and something vaguely like old books. It was intoxicating. We're in the final stages of acquiring a small tech firm in rural Vermont. Blackwood Innovations. I nodded, trying to look intelligent. I knew of the deal. It had been the subject of hushed speculation for weeks. It was an unusual move for our company, which typically focused on urban financial sectors. The deal is sensitive, he went on. The founder, a man named Alastair Finch, is eccentric. He's old money, deeply suspicious of corporate culture, and he lives in a cabin in the middle of nowhere. He's agreed to a final meeting, but on his own terms. At his property. He wants to meet the people, not the corporation. I had no idea where this was going, but my anxiety was slowly being replaced by a deep, thrumming curiosity. The executive team is too polished. Too corporate, Elias said, a faint, almost imperceptible curl to his lip. Finch would see right through them. He'd cancel the deal out of sheer principle. I need someone who can speak his language. Numbers, data, logic. But without the $1,000 suit and the PowerPoint presentation, he paused, his gray eyes pinning me to my chair. I need you. The words hung in the air. I need you. It was professional, of course. A simple statement of business necessity. But coming from him, directed at me, it landed with the force of a physical blow. Me? I squeaked, then cleared my throat. You want me to go to Vermont? I want you to come with me to Vermont, he corrected. Just the 2 of us. We'll drive up this weekend. Stay for a few days. Meet with Finch, walk him through the final projections, make him feel comfortable. Your analysis suggests you understand the core value of his company better than anyone else here. I need that in the room. Just the 2 of us. The phrase echoed in the sudden silence of the room. A road trip. To a cabin. In rural Vermont. with Elias Thorne. My mind stalled, unable to process the sheer improbability of it. It was a scenario more outlandish than my desk fantasy. I don't know what to say, sir, I stammered. Say yes, he said simply. It wasn't a question. My assistant will forward you the itinerary. We leave Friday morning. Be ready at 8. I'll pick you up. And just like that, it was decided. He picked up his tablet again, his gaze dropping to the screen, a clear dismissal. The audience was over. I was a problem solved, a box checked. I stood up on shaky legs, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and a terrifying, exhilarating hope. Thank you, Mr. Thorne, I mumbled, backing toward the door. He grunted in response, not looking up. I slipped out of his office, closing the door softly behind me, and leaned against the cool wall in the hallway, taking a deep, shuddering breath. The executive floor was still silent, but my inner world was a cacophony. Vermont. With him. For days. A part of me, the rational, analyst part, was screaming about the career implications, the pressure, the possibility of failure. But another part, the secret, yearning part that had been living on scraps of observation for years, was singing. It was a terrifying, beautiful, and utterly insane song. The next 2 days passed in a blur of anxiety and preparation. I packed and repacked my suitcase 3 times, agonizing over every choice. What does one wear to a sensitive business meeting in a cabin with an eccentric millionaire and the living embodiment of one's every secret fantasy? My wardrobe of gray and navy suits seemed woefully inadequate. I settled on my least corporate-looking clothes, dark jeans, a few simple button-down shirts, a worn corduroy blazer. I felt like I was packing for a first date with destiny. Sarah watched my frantic preparations with unconcealed glee. A trip with the big boss himself, she'd said, wiggling her eyebrows. Maybe he's finally noticed your elegant models, she'd winked, and I'd felt my face flame with color. If she only knew. If anyone in this office knew the sheer volume of my internal monologue about that man, I would have to move to another continent. Friday morning arrived, gray and damp. I was standing on the curb outside my apartment building at 7:45, my suitcase handle clenched in a death grip. I had barely slept, my mind replaying every possible scenario for the coming days, ranging from spectacular professional success to utter, soul-crushing humiliation. At precisely 8 o'clock, a sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb. It was the kind of car that didn't have a brand name you could see, only an aura of quiet, expensive power. The tinted windows slid down, and there he was, sitting in the driver's seat, wearing a pair of sunglasses despite the overcast sky. He was dressed in a dark gray Henley that stretched across his shoulders and a pair of well-fitting jeans. It was the first time I had ever seen him in anything other than a suit. The effect was devastating. He looked less like a chief executive officer and more like someone who could chop wood or build a house with his bare hands. "Get in," he said, his voice the same low rumble, but somehow different in the open air, less formal. I fumbled with my suitcase, my hands suddenly clumsy. He watched me, a flicker of something, impatience, amusement, in his expression. I finally managed to get the suitcase into the trunk and slid into the passenger seat. The interior of the car smelled of leather and that same cedar scent from his office. It was his scent. I was sitting inside his scent. He pulled away from the curb without another word, navigating the morning traffic with an easy, confident grace. I sat in silence, staring out the window, hyper-aware of his presence beside me. The space in the car felt both vast and incredibly small. He was right there. His hand was on the gearshift, mere inches from my knee. The fabric of his jeans was worn at the thigh. I could hear the soft sound of his breathing over the low thrum of the engine. My mind, as usual, started its frantic analysis. Why was he driving himself? A man like him surely had a driver. Was this part of the less corporate approach for the meeting? A calculated performance of normalcy? Or was it something else? Did he simply like to drive? I had no data. I was operating in a complete vacuum of information, and it was setting my teeth on edge. About an hour into the drive, after we had cleared the city and were moving through the rolling green hills of the countryside, he finally spoke. "There's coffee in the console," he said, not taking his eyes off the road. I looked down and saw a high-tech thermal carafe tucked into a holder. I poured a cup into the lid, the rich, dark aroma filling the car. I took a sip. It was perfect. Strong, black, no sugar. Exactly how I liked it. Of course it was. He was Elias Thorne. He didn't do things by halves. He would have known my coffee preference from my file. The thought was both comforting and deeply unsettling. "Thank you," I said, my voice quiet. He just nodded. The silence settled back in, but it felt different now. Less tense. The coffee had been an offering, a small bridge across the chasm of our professional hierarchy. We drove on, the landscape becoming more rugged, the trees thicker. The silence wasn't empty. It was filled with the hum of the tires on the asphalt and the soft rustle of his clothing when he shifted in his seat. I found myself watching him out of the corner of my eye. The way his hands held the steering wheel, his knuckles strong and defined. The focused set of his jaw as he scanned the road ahead. He was a man completely at ease with being in control, whether it was a boardroom or a highway. I, on the other hand, felt like a bundle of exposed nerves. Every tiny bump in the road seemed to jolt through my entire body. He must have sensed my anxiety, because he glanced over at me, his sunglasses pushed up on his head now that the sun was breaking through the clouds. His gray eyes were startlingly direct without the filter of office lighting. "Relax, Julian," he said. The use of my first name was still a novelty, and it sent a strange flutter through my stomach. "Finch is just a man. A stubborn one, but just a man. The numbers are on our side. All we have to do is not scare him off." I'm not used to this," I admitted, gesturing vaguely at the scenery, at the car, at the entire situation. "Field operations." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It was a tiny, fleeting thing, but it transformed his face, softening the hard lines around his mouth. "Think of it as a data-gathering exercise in a new environment." He was translating it into my language. The gesture was surprisingly perceptive, and it worked. Viewing the weekend as an exercise, a problem to be analyzed and solved, calmed the frantic, emotional part of my brain. I was an analyst. This was just a new data set. A very intimidating, incredibly handsome data set who was currently driving me into the wilderness, but a data set nonetheless. We stopped for lunch at a roadside diner that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. The vinyl on the booth was cracked, and the air smelled of stale coffee and fried onions. It was the last place on earth I would have expected to see Elias Thorne. But he strode in as if he owned the place, taking a booth by the window and picking up a menu without a word. I slid in opposite him, feeling deeply out of place. He ordered a cheeseburger and a black coffee. I, in a moment of panic, ordered the same. We ate in a silence that felt different again, more companionable. He seemed to shed his corporate skin with every mile we put between us and the city. Here, he wasn't the CEO. He was just a man eating a burger. A very well-built man whose Henley strained slightly when he reached for the ketchup, but a man nonetheless. I watched him eat. He was efficient, no wasted movements. But he seemed to be genuinely enjoying the simple, greasy food. I found myself relaxing, the tension in my shoulders easing for the first time all day. Maybe he was right. Maybe this was just a data-gathering exercise. "So," he said, wiping his mouth with a paper napkin. "Tell me about your currency fluctuation models. Not the what, the how. What gave you the idea to use a chaotic system algorithm?" The question caught me off guard. No one had ever asked me about the how of my work. They just wanted the results, the final numbers on a spreadsheet. I hesitated, then started to explain my thought process, the way I'd seen a pattern in the seemingly random data that reminded me of weather prediction models. I expected him to cut me off, to lose interest, but he listened. He actually listened, his gray eyes fixed on me, asking sharp, insightful questions that pushed me to articulate my ideas more clearly than I ever had before. For 20 minutes, we weren't boss and employee. We were just two people talking about a shared interest. I felt a spark of connection, a genuine meeting of minds that had nothing to do with my secret, stupid crush. It was real, and it was more intoxicating than any fantasy. When we got back in the car, the atmosphere had shifted irrevocably. The formal barrier between us had been breached. I still felt a thrum of nervous energy whenever he looked at me, but it was mingled now with a new feeling, something that felt dangerously like hope. The roads grew narrower and more winding as we climbed higher into the Green Mountains. The trees pressed in on either side, their leaves forming a dense canopy that dappled the road with sunlight. Cell service had disappeared an hour ago. We were truly isolated. Almost there, Elias said, his voice low. He turned the car onto a gravel road marked only by a small, hand-carved wooden sign that read Finch. The car bumped and jostled over the uneven terrain, and I had to brace my hand against the dashboard. The gravel road opened into a clearing, and there it was. It wasn't so much a cabin as a work of art, a sprawling structure of dark wood and glass built right into the side of the mountain. A plume of smoke curled from a stone chimney, and a large, scruffy-looking dog was sleeping on the porch. As Elias cut the engine, the silence of the forest rushed in. It was a deep, profound quiet, broken only by the chirping of birds and the rustle of leaves in the wind. The air was crisp and smelled of pine and damp earth. A man emerged from the cabin. He was tall and wiry, with a wild mane of white hair and a beard to match. He wore a flannel shirt and jeans, and he moved with the slow, deliberate pace of someone who was in no hurry. This had to be Alistair Finch. Elias got out of the car, and I followed, feeling my professional anxiety roaring back to life. Finch's eyes, a startlingly bright blue in his weathered face, scanned us both. The dog on the porch lifted its head, gave a lazy thump of its tail, and went back to sleep. "Thorn," Finch said, his voice a gravelly rasp. He didn't offer a hand. "You brought your boy." My face flushed. "Boy." He made me sound like an intern. "Alistair," Elias said, his tone even and calm. "This is Julian. He's the one who actually understands what you've built." The introduction was a shield. It wasn't a dismissal of Finch's comment, but a reframing. It defined my purpose, my value. I saw a flicker of respect in Finch's blue eyes as he looked at me again. He gave a curt nod. "Well, get your things," he grunted. "You're in the guest house. We'll talk over dinner." He turned and walked back into his cabin without another word. The guest house was a smaller, but equally beautiful, cabin set about 100 yards from the main house, deeper in the trees. It was one large room, dominated by a huge stone fireplace. There was a small kitchenette, a sitting area, and 2 beds. 2 beds, not 2 rooms. 2 beds, on opposite sides of the single, cavernous room. My heart did a slow, painful lurch. I dropped my suitcase by the door, my mind reeling. I was going to be sleeping in the same room as Elias Thorn. The thought was both terrifying and electrifying. All my carefully constructed analytical frameworks for this trip evaporated in an instant, replaced by a raw, overwhelming awareness of him. He seemed unfazed. He walked in, dropped his own bag by one of the beds, and began to survey the room. "This will do," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged space. He walked over to the large picture window that looked out into the dense forest. "He's testing us." "Testing us?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "The accommodations. The gruff welcome. The dog," he said, turning from the window. "He wants to see if we're just city boys who will be spooked by a little rustic charm. He wants to know if we're authentic." I looked around the room, at the hand-stitched quilts on the beds, the stack of firewood by the hearth, the utter and complete lack of a television or Wi-Fi router. We were completely cut off. Just us. My heart picked up its pace. The next few hours were a strange domestic dance. We unpacked our bags in near silence, each of us hyper-aware of the other's movements. I tried not to watch him, but it was impossible. My eyes were drawn to the efficient way he hung up his shirts, the stretch of his back as he bent to place his shoes by the door. He moved with a quiet confidence that filled the entire room, making my own awkwardness feel amplified. I sat on the edge of my bed, pretending to check my phone for a signal I knew wasn't there. I could feel his gaze on me. I risked a glance up and found him watching me, his expression unreadable. "Are you always this tense?" he asked. The question was direct, with no preamble. "I'm not tense," I lied, my voice tight. He raised an eyebrow, a small, skeptical gesture. "Julian, you've been holding your breath since we left the city." I let out a puff of air I hadn't realized I was holding. He was right. Of course he was right. He was perceptive to a terrifying degree. It felt like he could see right through my carefully constructed professional facade to the nervous, yearning mess underneath. "I am always this tense when I am around you." The words were on the tip of my tongue, a reckless, suicidal confession. I swallowed them down. "It's an important deal," I said instead. "I don't want to mess it up." He crossed the room in a few long strides and sat on the edge of the bed opposite me. The space between us was now just a few feet of braided rug. He leaned forward, his forearms resting on his knees, and his proximity was overwhelming. I could see the fine lines around his eyes, the slight roughness of his skin on his jaw. "You won't," he said, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. "You have the best grasp of the material. Better than me. That's why you're here. I trust your analysis." He held my gaze. "I trust you. I trust you." The words were a gut punch. It was more than praise. It was a statement of faith. And it came from the one person whose faith I craved above all others. A hot wave of emotion washed over me, a confusing mix of gratitude, panic, and a deep, aching affection. I suddenly felt an overwhelming urge to close the distance between us, to tell him everything, to confess the years of silent observation and the ridiculous, all-consuming crush. But I couldn't. I was Julian, the analyst, the invisible man. So I just nodded, unable to speak, my throat tight. He seemed to understand. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod in return, and then stood up, breaking the spell. "Let's get some fresh air before dinner," he said, his voice back to its usual brisk tone. "Clear our heads." We walked out of the cabin and followed a narrow path that led deeper into the woods. The air was cool and clean. The only sounds were the crunch of our footsteps on the pine needles and the distant call of a bird. We walked in silence for a long time, not side by side, but with him slightly ahead, as if he were leading the way. I watched the back of his neck, the way his dark hair curled just above the collar of his Henley. I watched his broad shoulders, the easy way he moved through the trees. And I thought about his trust. It was a weight, but a good one. A responsibility. He wasn't just my boss anymore. He was my partner. In this, at least. And that simple, terrifying thought changed everything. Dinner with Alistair Finch was an exercise in calculated chaos. He served us a hearty, nameless stew from a cast-iron pot and grilled us not on business, but on life. He asked about our families, our hobbies, what books we'd read lately. It was a disarming, brilliant tactic. He was assessing our character, not our financial projections. Elias was masterful. He was calm, direct, and honest, revealing small, humanizing details about himself. A passion for woodworking, a failed attempt at learning the guitar, that painted a picture of a man, not a mogul. I, on the other hand, was a nervous wreck. I stammered through my answers, convinced I was single-handedly sinking the entire acquisition. But every time I faltered, Elias would subtly steer the conversation or ask me a direct, work-related question that allowed me to retreat to the safety of my own expertise. He was covering for me, protecting me. By the end of the meal, I felt a profound sense of gratitude that was so potent it was almost painful. After dinner, Finch led us to his study, a room lined floor to ceiling with books. He finally gestured for us to sit. "All right," he said, leaning back in his worn leather armchair. "Show me the numbers." This was my moment. I took a deep breath and began. I didn't use a laptop or a presentation. I just talked. I walked him through my analysis, my models, my projections. I spoke about his company not as a target for acquisition, but as a living entity, a complex system of innovation and potential. I spoke with a passion I rarely allowed myself to show. And as I spoke, I wasn't looking at Finch. I was looking at Elias. He was leaning against the mantelpiece, his arms crossed, watching me. And in his eyes, I saw something I had never seen before. It wasn't just approval. It was a kind of quiet, intense pride. He was looking at me as if I were the most brilliant person he had ever met. That look gave me a confidence I didn't know I possessed. I finished my presentation, my voice steady, my heart pounding. Finch was silent for a long moment, stroking his white beard. Then he gave a slow nod. "The boy was the right choice, Thorne," he said. "He understands. He sees the patterns." He stood up. "We'll sign the papers in the morning." Relief washed over me so powerfully I felt dizzy. We had done it. I had done it. We walked back to the guest house under a brilliant canopy of stars. The air was cold, and I could see my breath. I was buzzing with adrenaline, with success, with the memory of that look in Elias's eyes. "You were incredible," he said, his voice a low murmur in the darkness. "You were the one who navigated Finch," I countered. "I would have crashed and burned in the first 5 minutes." He stopped walking and turned to face me on the narrow path. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting his face in silver and shadow. "We did it together," he said. He reached out and placed his hand on my shoulder. His thumb brushed against the side of my neck, a small, fleeting touch that sent a jolt of electricity through my entire body. It wasn't a casual gesture. It was deliberate, meaningful. "You did good, Julian." His hand lingered for a moment too long, the warmth of it seeping through my shirt, branding my skin. My breath hitched. This is it. This is the moment. My mind screamed at me to do something, to say something. But I was frozen, trapped in the intensity of his gaze, in the weight of his hand on my shoulder. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the moment was gone. He dropped his hand and started walking again. "Let's get some sleep," he said, his voice slightly rough. "Big day tomorrow." Back in the cabin, the tension was a living thing. The single room felt even smaller now. We went through the motions of getting ready for bed in a charged silence. I changed in the bathroom, my hands shaking as I brushed my teeth. When I came out, he was already in his bed, lying on his side, facing away from me. He wore a simple gray t-shirt and flannel pants. I slipped into my own bed, my body rigid. I lay on my back, staring up at the dark, vaulted ceiling, listening to the sound of his breathing. It was a slow, steady rhythm in the quiet of the room. Every instinct I had was screaming at me. He was right there, just a few feet away. All I had to do was get up, walk across the rug, and in what? What would I even do? Hours passed. I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing, replaying every moment of the day, every look, every word, that touch on my neck. Was I imagining things? Was I projecting my own desperate desires onto a series of meaningless professional interactions? The analyst in me searched for data, for evidence, but there was nothing conclusive. Just a lingering touch, a look of pride, a shared silence. It was all circumstantial. Then, I heard him shift in his bed. "Julian?" His voice was a low whisper in the darkness. My heart stopped. "Yeah." I whispered back, my voice cracking. There was a long pause. I could hear the crackle of the dying embers in the fireplace. "I can't sleep either," he said. Another silence. The air was thick with unspoken things. I could feel the words I wanted to say lodged in my throat, a painful, suffocating lump. "That look you gave me," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "In the study, when I was talking, I heard him take a slow breath. What about it? No one has ever looked at me like that before." I confessed to the ceiling, my voice shaking. He was silent for so long I thought he had fallen asleep, that I had imagined the entire exchange. I felt a hot flush of shame. I had overstepped. I had read everything wrong. Then, I heard the rustle of blankets. I turned my head on the pillow just in time to see his silhouette rising from his bed. He crossed the small space between us, his footsteps silent on the rug. He stopped at the side of my bed, a tall, dark shape against the faint light from the window. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, looking down at me. I couldn't see his expression in the darkness, but I could feel the intensity of his presence. My entire body was humming with a terrifying, hopeful energy. This is not a fantasy. This is real. The thought is a lightning strike. My body goes rigid, then trembles. He is here. He crossed the room. He lowers himself, not sitting, but kneeling by the side of my bed. The movement is slow, deliberate, and it strips the air from my lungs. The mattress dips slightly with his proximity. He is so close now. So close. I can feel the warmth radiating from him, smell the faint, clean scent of his skin mixed with the wood smoke from his clothes. "Julian," he says, and my name is not a question this time. It's a statement, an anchor in the swirling chaos of my mind. His voice is a low gravel, a sound that seems to vibrate right through the mattress and into my bones. My hand is lying on the quilt, and he reaches for it. His fingers don't just take mine, they envelop them. His hand is large, warm, and slightly calloused. It feels impossibly real. He laces his fingers through mine, a firm, possessive grip that sends a shockwave up my arm. This is not a handshake. This is not a consoling touch. This is something else entirely. This is a claim. My mind is blank. All the analysis, all the overthinking, all the years of carefully constructed scenarios, they all vanish. There is only this. The darkness, the quiet, the weight of his hand in mine. The sound of his breathing, which is no longer steady. It's as ragged as my own. "The way I looked at you," he says, his voice rough with an emotion I can't decipher. It's the way I've wanted to look at you for a very long time. The confession hangs in the air between us, simple, direct, and utterly devastating. It shatters every assumption I have ever made about him, about myself, about the vast, unbridgeable distance between us. He wanted this. He wanted me. It wasn't just in my head. I make a sound, a choked gasp of disbelief and relief. I can't form words. My entire being is focused on the pressure of his fingers intertwined with mine. It's the most profound communication I have ever experienced. He tightens his grip, as if to reassure me that this is real. I told myself it was just professional admiration. He continues, his voice barely a whisper now. For your mind, your work. I told myself it was nothing more. He lets out a short, harsh breath that might be a laugh or a sigh. I am very good at lying to myself. He lifts my hand, the one he is holding, and brings it to his lips. He presses a kiss to my knuckles, his mouth warm and firm against my skin. It's not a passionate kiss. It's a kiss of reverence, of surrender, and it undoes me completely. A single, hot tear escapes my eye and traces a path down my temple into my hair. Elias. I breathe his name for the first time without a mister in front of it. The name feels foreign and yet perfectly right on my tongue. He shifts, moving from his knees to sit on the edge of my bed. The mattress sinks under his weight, and he leans over me. His other hand comes up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking gently over my cheek, wiping away the tear I hadn't even realized had fallen. His touch is so tender it makes my heart ache. I didn't bring you here for the deal, Julian, he says, his gray eyes, now visible in the faint moonlight, searching mine. Not just for the deal. I brought you here to get you away from the office, away from the titles and the hierarchy. I had to see. See what? I whisper, my voice trembling. If this, he says, his thumb tracing the line of my lower lip, sending shivers through my entire body, was real, or if I had just constructed it in my head. He's echoing my own thoughts, my own fears. The realization that he, Elias Thorne, the man who controlled boardrooms and commanded respect, was just as uncertain, just as vulnerable as I was, is the final thing that breaks down my defenses. I am no longer the analyst. I am no longer the employee. I am just a man who has been yearning for this, for him, for so long that it has become a part of who I am. I lift my free hand and place it on his chest, over his heart. I can feel the steady, strong beat of it beneath my palm. It's beating as fast as mine. Real. This is all real. It's real. I say, the words of promise. And then he lowers his head, and he kisses me. It is nothing like my crude, desperate fantasy of being pushed over a desk. It is slow. It is gentle. It is a question. His lips are soft, hesitant at first, testing, asking for permission that I give by tilting my head, by pressing back against him. The faint stubble on his jaw is a rough, pleasant friction against my skin. He tastes of coffee and something that is uniquely him, a clean, male taste that I know I will never forget. The kiss deepens, and it is no longer hesitant. It is a conversation we have been waiting years to have. It speaks of longing, of loneliness, of the quiet observation from across a crowded office. His hand moves from my jaw to the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair, holding me to him. My hand on his chest clenches, gripping the soft fabric of his t-shirt. It is not a kiss of frantic passion, but of discovery, of homecoming. It feels like I have been waiting my entire life for this single moment, for this man's mouth on mine. When he finally breaks the kiss, we are both breathless. He rests his forehead against mine, and we just breathe together in the darkness, our breath mingling in the cold air. Julian, he murmurs, his lips brushing against mine as he speaks. I don't say anything. I just tighten my grip on his shirt, holding on to him as if he might disappear. I feel a profound sense of peace settle over me, a quiet joy that is so overwhelming it feels like it might break me. The constant, anxious hum that has been the soundtrack to my life for as long as I can remember has finally gone silent. There is only the sound of our breathing and the steady beat of his heart under my hand. He stays there for a long time, his forehead pressed to mine, his hand still tangled in my hair. I close my eyes, memorizing the feeling of his weight on my bed, the warmth of his body, the scent of his skin. This is the data point that matters. This is the only truth I need. Eventually, he pulls back slightly, just enough to look at me. I can't read his expression in the dark, but I can feel the gentle pressure of his hand on my neck. "Get some sleep," he says, his voice a low, intimate rumble. He stands up, and for a terrifying second, I think he is going back to his own bed. My hand flies out, grabbing his wrist. "Don't," I say, the word raw and pleading. He stills. Then, without a word, he pulls back the quilt on the other side of the bed and slides in beside me. He doesn't touch me right away. He just lies there, on his back, a solid, warm presence next to me. The bed feels impossibly large, and the space between us is a chasm of new, terrifying possibility. Then, he rolls onto his side to face me. He reaches out, his arm wrapping around my waist, and pulls me against him. I go willingly, tucking my face into the crook of his neck. His body is a furnace against mine. I can feel the hard planes of his chest, the solid strength of his arms around me. He smells of soap and sleep and man. I breathe him in, and it feels like breathing for the first time. He rests his chin on the top of my head, and I feel the rumble in his chest as he speaks. "This is real," he says, a quiet confirmation in the dark. I just nod against his chest, unable to speak. I wrap my own arms around him, holding on tight. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I don't feel like an observer in my own life. I feel like I am finally home. I fall asleep in his arms, the sound of his heartbeat a steady, reassuring lullaby. I woke to the unfamiliar sensation of sunlight on my face and the solid weight of an arm draped possessively over my waist. For a disoriented moment, I didn't know where I was. The room smelled of pine and old wood, and the light streaming through the window was a soft, morning gold. Then it all came rushing back. Finch, the deal, the cabin, Elias. My eyes snapped open. He was still asleep, his face turned toward me on the pillow. In sleep, the hard, controlled lines of his face were softened. His dark hair was a mess, falling across his forehead. His mouth was slightly parted, and a faint, dark stubble shadowed his jaw. He looked younger, more vulnerable. He looked beautiful. His arm was heavy and warm around me, his hand resting on my hip. Our legs were tangled together under the thick quilt. My head was pillowed on his bicep. At some point in the night, I had burrowed myself against him like a limpet. A hot flush of embarrassment and pleasure washed over me. I had slept in Elias Thorne's arms. I had slept, deeply and without dreams, for the first time in years. Carefully, so as not to wake him, I tried to extract myself from his embrace. But the moment I moved, his arm tightened, pulling me closer. His eyes fluttered open. They were cloudy with sleep for a second, then they focused on me, and a slow, quiet smile spread across his face. It was not the fleeting, ghost of a smile I had seen before. This was a genuine, unguarded smile, and it completely transformed him. It made my breath catch in my throat. "Morning," he murmured, his voice thick and rough with sleep. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. "Morning," I whispered back, my own voice barely audible. I felt suddenly, intensely shy. Last night had been a dreamlike confession in the dark. This was the morning after. This was daylight. Reality. And I had no idea what the rules were now. The silence stretched between us, filled with the chirping of birds outside the window. I could feel the familiar tendrils of anxiety starting to creep back in. Did he regret it? Was this going to be a one-time, stress-induced aberration? Was he going to pull away and pretend it never happened, retreating back behind his CEO facade? My mind started spinning, creating a dozen different scenarios for how this would all fall apart. He must have seen the panic in my eyes, because his smile faded slightly, replaced by a look of concern. He shifted, propping himself up on one elbow so he could look down at me. His other hand came up to cup my face, his thumb stroking my cheek. "Hey," he said softly, "you're overthinking." It was a statement, not a question. He knew. He could read me like one of my own spreadsheets. I just nodded, unable to deny it. "Stop," he said, his voice firm but gentle. He leaned down and pressed a soft, chaste kiss to my forehead. "There's nothing to analyze here. Not right now." The simple, reassuring gesture calmed the frantic storm in my head. He wasn't pulling away. He was doing the opposite. He was grounding me. The sound of a sharp knock on the cabin door made us both jump. "Thorne, you decent?" Alistair Finch's gravelly voice called from outside. Elias sighed and rolled out of bed with a fluid grace that I envied. He pulled on a pair of jeans he'd left on the floor and ran a hand through his messy hair. "1 minute, Alistair," he called back. He glanced at me, and there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Humor, maybe even a hint of conspiracy. "Get dressed," he mouthed. I scrambled out of bed, my heart pounding, and quickly pulled on my own clothes. The intimacy of the moment was shattered, replaced by the impending reality of our professional obligations. By the time Elias opened the door, I was standing by the fireplace, trying to look as if I had been up for hours, contemplating the cold ashes. Finch stood on the porch, holding 2 steaming mugs. He looked from Elias, to me, and then to the very obviously slept-in state of my bed. A slow, knowing grin spread across his weathered face. He handed one of the mugs to Elias. "Brought you boys some coffee," he said, his bright blue eyes twinkling with mischief. "Figured you had a long night of negotiations." My face burned. The implication was so clear, so unapologetic, that I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. This was a disaster. Finch was going to think, well, he was going to think the truth, and that truth could jeopardize everything. But Elias was completely unfazed. He took a sip of the coffee and leaned against the doorframe, the picture of calm. "Something like that," he said, his voice even. Julian's analysis was very persuasive. The double meaning was so audacious it took my breath away. He was neither confirming nor denying, simply turning Finch's insinuation back on him with a dry wit that left the old man chuckling. "I bet it was," Finch said, clapping Elias on the shoulder. "Well, the papers are on my desk whenever you're ready. No rush. Enjoy the morning." He gave me one last, lingering look, a look that was no longer assessing, but seemed to hold a genuine warmth and approval. Then he turned and ambled back toward the main house. Elias closed the door and turned to face me, a small, wry smile on his lips. I was still frozen by the fireplace, my mind reeling from the exchange. "Relax," he said, walking over to me. He handed me his mug of coffee. "He doesn't care. If anything, he probably respects us more now. He values authenticity, remember? Authenticity," I squeaked. "He thinks we're—" I couldn't even say the words. "He thinks we're human," Elias finished for me, his expression softening. He reached out and tucked a stray piece of my hair behind my ear. The gesture was so casual, so domestic, it made my heart ache. And he's not wrong. We signed the papers an hour later in Finch's sun-drenched study. The moment was anticlimactic, a simple matter of ink on paper. The real deal had been brokered the night before, in conversations and confessions, in shared meals and quiet walks. As Elias slid the signed contract into his briefcase, I felt a pang of sadness. It was over. The reason for us being here was gone. Now we had to go back. Back to the city, to the office, to the world where he was Mr. Thorne and I was just an analyst. The drive back was the reverse of the journey up, but the atmosphere inside the car was entirely different. The silence was no longer tense or uncertain. It was comfortable, companionable. Every so often, Elias would reach over and rest his hand on my knee, a simple, grounding touch that sent a quiet thrill through me. But as the skyline of the city appeared on the horizon, my anxiety began to build again. The cabin in Vermont had been a bubble, a separate reality where the rules of our normal lives didn't apply. What would happen when that bubble burst? Elias seemed to sense the shift in my mood. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his eyes on the thickening traffic. "The office," I admitted. "What happens on Monday?" He was silent for a moment, navigating a lane change with practiced ease. "What do you want to happen?" he asked, turning the question back on me. I didn't know how to answer. What I wanted seemed impossible. I wanted this. I wanted the easy intimacy, the shared silence, the feeling of his hand on my knee. I wanted the man who had kissed me in the dark and held me until morning. I couldn't imagine going back to seeing him across a boardroom, to calling him Mr. Thorne, to pretending that the most significant event of my life had never happened. "I don't want to go back to the way things were," I said, the words quiet but firm. He reached over, took my hand, and laced his fingers through mine, resting our joined hands on the center console. "Good," he said simply, "because I have no intention of letting that happen." He dropped me off at my apartment building. The sleek black car at the curb looked out of place in my modest neighborhood. He cut the engine and turned to face me. The moment felt charged, a critical juncture. I'll see you Monday, I said, my voice uncertain. It sounded like a dismissal, a return to the old dynamic. No, he said. He unbuckled his seatbelt. You'll have dinner with me tonight. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of intent. My place. 7 o'clock. I'll send a car. My heart soared. He wasn't letting the bubble burst. He was building a new one, right here in the city. Okay, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. Okay. He leaned in and gave me a short, firm kiss. It was a kiss of promise, a seal on the new contract we had made, the one that had nothing to do with business. 7, he repeated, his eyes holding mine. I spent the next few hours in a state of delirious panic and excitement. I showered, shaved, and tried on every outfit I owned, finally settling on the same dark jeans and button-down I had worn in Vermont. It felt right. It felt like me, the me he had seen, the me he had chosen. The car he sent was the same kind of discreet, powerful sedan he drove himself, but this one had a driver. I was whisked through the city to a part of town I had only ever seen in magazines. His building was a sleek tower of glass and steel overlooking the park. The doorman knew my name. The elevator opened directly into his apartment, and I stepped out into a space that was both exactly what I expected and nothing like it. It was huge, minimalist, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a jaw-dropping view of the city lights. But it wasn't cold or sterile. It was filled with books, with pieces of rough-hewn wooden furniture that he had clearly made himself, with a sense of quiet, personal comfort. It was a home. He was standing in the kitchen, a glass of wine in his hand, wearing a soft black sweater and jeans. He looked completely at ease, and the sight of him, here, in his own space, made my breath catch. You're here, he said, a warm smile on his face. I'm here, I confirmed, feeling a nervous energy thrumming through me. He walked over and handed me a glass of wine. Our fingers brushed, and the small touch was as electric as it had been in the forest. He didn't kiss me. He just stood close, his presence a warm, solid comfort. I have a confession, he said, his voice low. I can't cook. I laughed, a real, genuine laugh. Me neither. I figured, he said, a teasing glint in his eyes. So I ordered in. I hope you like Thai. We ate sitting on the floor, our backs against the sofa, the containers of food spread out on his low, handmade coffee table. We talked for hours. We didn't talk about work. We talked about everything else. Movies we loved, places we wanted to travel, our childhoods, our fears. He told me about his passion for woodworking, how shaping something real and solid with his hands was the only thing that truly quieted his mind. I told him about my love for old maps, for the way they tried to impose order on a chaotic world. It was easy. It was effortless. It felt more real than any conversation I had ever had. I was seeing the man behind the CEO, the man who had been there all along, hidden in plain sight. And I was falling for him all over again. But this time, it wasn't a fantasy. It was real. After we ate, he put on some quiet jazz music, and we sat on the sofa, a comfortable distance between us. The anxiety started to creep back in. This was all so new, so fragile. I didn't know the steps to this dance. He turned to me, his expression serious. Monday is going to be an adjustment, he said. At the office, I have to be Mr. Thorne. We have to be professional. I don't want gossip, and I won't put you in a position where people question your merit. My heart sank. It was the conversation I had been dreading. The return to reality. But, he continued, closing the distance between us on the sofa. He took my hand, his thumb stroking over my knuckles. The moment we walk out of that building, I am not your boss. And you are not my employee. He looked me directly in the eye, his gaze intense and unwavering. Out here, we're just Elias and Julian. Is that clear? The relief was so profound it made me feel lightheaded. He had thought it through. He had a plan. He was protecting us, protecting me. Clear, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Good, he said. He leaned in and kissed me. And this time, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. It was a deep, searing kiss filled with all the longing and promise of the past few days. It was a kiss that said, this is ours. The next few weeks were a strange, exhilarating exercise in duality. At the office, we were the picture of professionalism. He was Mr. Thorne, the formidable CEO, and I was Julian, the quiet analyst. We exchanged curt nods in the hallway. maintained a formal tone in meetings. I would sit in a room with him, my heart pounding, and deliver a report, and he would listen with a cool, critical expression. No one suspected a thing. Sarah just thought my newfound confidence was a result of the successful Vermont trip. But then, at 5 o'clock, my phone would buzz with a text. My place. Or, there's a small Italian restaurant I want to show you. And I would step out of the office building and into another world. A world where he was Elias, the man who would be waiting for me, his hand reaching for mine the moment we were out of sight. Our evenings were our sanctuary. We explored the city, we stayed in and watched old movies, we talked for hours. I learned the landscape of his body, the sound of his laughter, the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching. He was tender and passionate, patient and demanding. He showed me a side of myself I never knew existed, a person who was confident and desired. One rainy Saturday, we were lying in his bed, the gray light filtering through the windows. I was tracing the lines on his palm, my head resting on his chest. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice a sleepy rumble. "That first day," I said, "when you called me to your office. I was so terrified. I had this ridiculous fantasy." He shifted, turning to look at me. "Tell me," he said, his eyes curious. My face flushed. "It's stupid. Tell me," he insisted, a smile playing on his lips. So I told him. I told him about my absurd, over-the-top fantasy of him pushing me over his desk. I expected him to laugh, to be amused by my ridiculousness. But he didn't. He just listened, his expression growing more intense. When I finished, he was silent for a moment. Then he leaned in and kissed me, a slow, deep kiss that left me breathless. "The fantasy is good," he said, his voice a low growl against my lips. "But the reality," he murmured, kissing me again, "is so much better." And he was right. The reality of us, the quiet intimacy, the shared laughter, the feeling of safety and belonging in his arms, it was more profound, more satisfying than any desperate fantasy my lonely mind could have ever concocted. I looked at him, at this incredible, unexpected man who had seen me, truly seen me, when I had spent my whole life trying to be invisible. The journey from that first terrifying summons to this quiet, perfect moment in his bed had been a dizzying, terrifying, wonderful fall. He pulled me close, his arms a strong, safe harbor. I rested my head on his shoulder, listening to the steady, reassuring beat of his heart. The anxious hum inside me was gone for good. There was only a quiet, profound sense of peace. I was no longer orbiting from a distance. I was home,